Ever since Marvel's Avengers movies took the entire world by storm, it seems that everybody's talking about shared cinematic universes. Everybody wants to get in on the action with the interconnectivity between movies and between characters, and the question is whether or not the horror genre will follow suit. But it turns out horror's been doing this for years. Let's go ahead and talk about it. We're looking at shared universe horror movies on the Horror Movie Syllabus. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, interesting, noteworthy, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good overview of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is about. But in short, what we do is we take a particular subgenre of horror and we look at 3 representative movies from that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're talking about is shared universe horror movies. And what we're really talking about are movies that share a universe. They exist in the same universe with each other. And this got popularized in the recent past with the Avengers movies that Marvel has done, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where all of the movies exist in the same universe, and what happens in one movie affects another movie. What one character does in one movie affects what happens to another character in another movie, and the characters will cross over frequently in those movies. It's been wildly successful for them, both critically and commercially. They've made a ton of money off of it. Fans love it. Critics love it. It's very good. I like Marvel movies. I'm not here to bash them or anything like that. It's fantastic. They've done a great job. But what's happened as a result is it seems like everybody wants to have shared universes. The studios see the crazy amounts of money that Marvel's made on these movies, and they want a piece of that pie. They want to get in on that action. And so they start trying to find ways to make shared cinematic universes. They try to make crossovers and things like that happen for their movies, whether it makes sense or not. And a lot of us probably have been bracing ourselves to see these things permeate the horror genre. And by and large, they haven't. And I think the reason for that is because shared universes is old hat when it comes to horror. Horror has been doing shared universes way before Marvel even existed. As far back as the 1940s, the Universal monsters were doing shared universes when, you had Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which I think was probably the first one where they had what they called I think they called it monster rallies or something like that, where basically 2 of their monsters or more would pair off in a movie and maybe fight each other or team up, and these were wildly successful. They had the famous comedy duo from the 40s, Abbott and Costello, Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, or Abbott and Costello meets the Wolfman, and they would have them interact with these Universal monsters. And mind you, they had their own series of movies, so it was creating a shared universe between Abbott and Costello and the Universal monsters. Again, wildly popular. So you might say Universal was ahead of its time or pioneered this idea of the shared universe, but it's worth noting that this is the first instance in horror that I can think of, at least, where this happens. But it sets the tone for what we typically see for a shared universe when it comes to horror, which is like a versus movie, for lack of a better way of putting it. A movie where 2 different monsters or 2 different characters from 2 different franchises face off against one another. Usually with there being some sort of fight between the 2, and it's so-and-so versus so-and-so. That is a lot of what you're seeing when you're talking about shared universes in horror, and it's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, as a matter of fact. But there are other shared universes as well, more ambitious ones that try to create an entire universe rather than just kind of having a bit of a one-off crossover, if you will. We're going to talk about both today because shared universe is not only a trendy thing right now, but it's also an interesting way to take 2 different franchises, or more importantly, fans from 2 different franchises, and try to blend them together. It's not always easy to do. In fact, more often than not, it's not easy to do, and it doesn't go so well. And we'll talk about that a bit. But it's interesting to try to see a filmmaker or filmmakers try to appease 2 different fan bases that, from Venn diagram purposes, probably close to a circle for a lot of overlap, but distinctly different fan bases, especially when you pit 2 different monsters together, or fans of 2 different monsters are going to be rooting for their monsters. And we're seeing more mainstream movies, non-horror, maybe horror adjacent movies kind of follow suit. The recent Godzilla versus King Kong movie is a perfect example of this. Now, both of those movies are monster movies, so I'd actually fold them into the horror genre, but they are really kind of more action movies, and they were marketed as mainstream action movies. But it has its origins, it has its roots in horror, and again, going back as far as the 1940s, but we're still seeing it even today. And I'll be honest, I think those movies are fun. I enjoy that because I tend to have a broad scope and taste in horror. I tend to be fans of a lot of different franchises. I tend to not really. There's very few that I really actively dislike. So if you put franchise A and franchise B together in some sort of mashup or versus movie, chances are I'm going to be happy no matter what, because I like both the franchises and I'm enjoying seeing them face off. And then if you try to do something a little bit more ambitious, like what we're going to talk about in some of these movies, I'm there for that too. I find that to be a lot of fun as well. So I'm kind of a sucker for these shared universe movies. Because of my comic book sensibilities, I grew up reading comic books, and in comic books, all the comic books were connected. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is based on the Marvel Universe, which is a series of comic books with different characters that all overlap and exist in the same universe. DC Comics was the same way, although they've had less success with their cinematic universe. But I digress. So I'm maybe predisposed to like these movies, and as a result, I wanted to talk about them. So that's what we're going to do today. Uh, as usual, we've organized our movies into undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels, and in this case, those levels are going to indicate the level of popularity or success. Of the movies, as they go on, they're more and more successful at the box office and more popular. So that's the order we put them in today. So with that, let's go ahead and get into these movies. The first movie we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003, but it was a long time coming because fans of those two franchises had been kind of teased with a pairing of these two horror slasher icons for years and years and years, and it took a long time to bring it to the screen. If you haven't seen the movie is exactly what it sounds like. It's Freddy versus Jason. Freddy from A Nightmare on Elm Street and Jason from Friday the 13th, wind up facing off with some neighborhood kids kind of caught in between, caught in the middle. I won't go into more detail than that, and frankly, there's not a whole lot more detail than that to go into. The movie is supposed to be a face-off of two legendary monsters, modern monsters, fighting each other, to see who wins. It's a pretty simple concept, and yet, as simple as it was very complex to get it to the screen. Part of that complexity came from what I was talking about earlier. Two franchises with two different mythologies and two fan bases that, again, overlap, but they tend to have their favorites. For example, I'm a Friday the 13th fan. I like it much more than Nightmare on Elm Street. I love both franchises, but Friday the 13th, that's my jam. And I think a lot of fans are like that. So they were trying to appease two different fan bases by facing those two characters off with each other. Well, if there's going to be a face-off and both sides are going to fight, one of them's going to win, and so one fan base is probably going to be a little disappointed. There's challenge number one. Challenge number two is there's a lot of mythology to both of those series. They each have their own franchise that has 8, 9, 10, 12 movies in it. That's a lot of backstory and a lot of continuity to kind of work together. And so those two franchises don't necessarily smoothly integrate. You're trying to retroactively put them in the same world when they weren't originally in the same world. That can be a challenge, and that was a challenge for this movie. So the two writers of this movie, Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, who I actually had the pleasure of speaking to at a convention once, they were kind enough to take a few minutes and chat with me. They really had their hands full with making this movie, writing this movie, because several drafts over the years had gone through major, development hell, and they couldn't crack the code. And these are the two guys that finally did crack the code. And quibble about whether or not you feel like they were successful. I feel like they were, because it was a Herculean task. And when I talked to them about it, they were very candid about trying to find that balance where you could give Freddy enough love and give Jason enough love, and by extension, give their fans enough love. Each of them needed to have enough screen time and story devoted to them to satisfy the fan bases. And then, of course, in the fight, you had to come up with an ending that each side could feel like they won. And I feel like Shannon and Swift did this. I feel like they nailed this. And I know that opinions on this vary. There are people that love this movie. I'm one of them. I love this movie. And there are people who don't like this movie. They think it's cheesy, or they think it falls short, or they're unhappy because it didn't adequately serve one or the other or both of the characters. I can't argue with that last point. It probably doesn't adequately serve either of them. And I think that's going to be the problem you come across when you're putting any two franchises together like this, is that neither of them are going to get served as well as they should. Another critique that the people have of this movie is that they, in retconning each of their stories to kind of mesh them together, they had to create some things that didn't really exist before. Like, in order to make the narrative work, they had to in order to balance the two powers out, they had to create plot points like giving Jason, for example, a fear of water that never came up before and don't actually align very well with the series. And you know, I can't argue with that. That's true. And I'm a continuity person, so that should irk me more than it does, but I'm willing to give it a pass because at the end of the day, the movie's trying to have fun, and I feel like it accomplished that goal. Now, another thing that Shannon and Swift pointed out to me when we were talking was that they wrote the script, but the script did go through rewrites afterwards that they did not have control over. So some of the dialogue in particular is not theirs, and they cringe about it. And dialogue is another thing that's been criticized about this movie. The human characters that are caught in the middle of this fight between these two titans generally, by and large, aren't loved. I kind of love them, but I think it's because I like the actors a lot. Monica Keena and Catherine Isabel. I really like those actors, so I'm a little more forgiving maybe. But I can't fight you that the dialogue is sometimes very bad or even just a little off color. I think we talked about this in a previous video about Kelly Rowland and some of the stuff she says in the movie. Shannon and Swift said they didn't write that, and they were horrified and angered about it. So very fascinating. If you're ever going to get a chance to talk to those guys, they show up at conventions a lot, or they're also on Twitter. They're active on that. If you have questions for them, they're usually pretty cool about responding. They have some stories, man. They are candid. They're interesting people to talk to, and it sounds like they went through an ordeal both in getting this movie together and then watching it get made without their having control over it. And they're big fans of both of those franchises, so you kind of feel for them, and they get a lot of guff from the fans, and they don't really understand. The fans don't really understand what they try to deliver, and I still think they mostly delivered. I think that they had a movie that was a lot of fun, but interestingly, and I didn't realize this until I saw somebody else mention this on social media, that this movie, Freddy vs. Jason, ended both franchises except for remakes. Like there were no additional installments of either franchise after this movie. Each franchise decided to try to reboot, and to date, that's all that's happened. Both of them had remakes that failed both critically and commercially. I shouldn't say commercially; they were big enough hits, but they not enough of a hit to make a sequel for either of them. So did Freddy vs. Jason kill these franchises? I don't think I'd go that far. I don't think that's the case. I mean, the movie was incredibly successful financially. It was probably the biggest financial hit for either franchise. So, in terms of making money, which is what it was all about for the studios, this one worked. It made sense. It hit. Now, again, it didn't lead to more sequels. There was an attempted sequel, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, looping in the Evil Dead franchise to the series. And that never got off the ground other than in comic form. Although it's worth noting that references to the Evil Dead have been peppered throughout, like Friday the 13th before. So there's an argument to be made that the Evil Dead franchise already is part of a shared universe with Freddy and Jason. And I like to think of that. I like to think that's the case. And I would like to see them make that movie, but I'm pretty sure that's never going to happen. One of the things I find charming about Freddy vs. Jason is it really is like a throwback to those Universal movies of the 1940s where Frankenstein would meet the Wolfman or whatever. Jason and Freddy, Michael Myers, those guys, those are our new Universal monsters. Those are our classic monsters for this generation, for this era. And so seeing them being paired up like that is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the movie. I revisit it. I think it's a lot of fun. Again, I know it's got its detractors. That's fine. But I think it's a lot of fun. And if you like Freddy and or Jason, and you haven't seen this movie, it'd be a surprise. But if you haven't seen the movie, you got to check it out. You have to. It's kind of like required viewing if you're fans of those slashers to see this movie. If you have seen it and you've got some thoughts, share them in the comments below because, of course, I like to hear other opinions on these issues. But I'm a big fan of Freddy versus Jason. I acknowledge that there are people who have opinions, have problems with it, have issues with it, and I think a lot of those issues are actually valid. I just don't care. As you've seen when I've talked about slashers in the past, I'm pretty forgiving when it comes to them. So absolutely none of the issues that people complain about in Freddy vs. Jason faze me. I go, yep, that's true, that's accurate, and I still like it. So that's where I'm at. I'm heavily biased, I guess, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So by all means, share in the comments below what you think of Freddy vs. Jason. The next movie we're talking about today, our graduate level selection, is it's The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man came out in 2020, so it's a very recent release to show up on the syllabus, and with good reason because the movie was not only a big hit, but it was also extremely good. If you haven't seen it, it is an updating of the original Universal monster movie, The Invisible Man, but with a very modern take on it and a very different narrative. It focuses on a woman who's in an abusive relationship, tries to leave her abusive boyfriend, and then he apparently commits suicide. But then she seems to be being stalked by him or some invisible presence that seems to be him. And as usual, I'm going to go ahead and stop there so I don't spoil it for people who haven't seen it. But it's a fantastic film. I went into this movie kind of with lowered expectations. It's a Blumhouse film, and I like Blumhouse films. Blumhouse being for those that don't know, it's a movie studio, but it's kind of like a smaller studio, and they focus on making genre films, specifically mostly horror films, on a lower budget, but they make quality films. They get good talent, give them a little bit of money, and kind of say, hey, have at it, go do what you're going to do. The results have been mixed. Some of them are fantastic, and some of them not so much, but by and large, I tend to like them. So I was expecting to like this movie, but I didn't expect to think it was this good. Part of why it's really good is it was made by Lee Winnell, and we've talked about Lee Winnell before in the Saw series and Insidious. So Lee Winnell is a horror figure, and he's very noteworthy. I've always kind of thought of him as a bit of secondary because when he first hit the scene, he was with James Wan when they were doing Saw together, and James Wan he is an incredible talent. He's a great director. He has a great eye, and I always felt like Lee Winnell was just secondary to him on that. With Invisible Man, I feel like Lee Winnell steps out of that shadow. If he hadn't already, and there's an argument to be made that he already had, but if he hadn't already, he steps out of the shadow for sure at this point because The Invisible Man is incredibly well made. And if you boil it down, it's kind of hilarious. It's a lot of shots of just empty space with nothing there. And Winnell makes it really creepy. And that takes talent. That takes skill. And so I tip my hat to Lee Winnell because, in a vacuum, that's just silly. It's like, I'm going to take a camera and I'm going to film this empty hallway. And, ooh, is there somebody there? But it worked. It worked really, really well. I was incredibly impressed with the filmmaking in this movie. It's not like David Lynch or Steven Spielberg. It's not. I don't want to get carried away about it, but it's really solid, really effective filmmaking. It's not flashy, but it's really, really good. And I appreciate it very much. The other reason I think this movie is as successful as it was and as good as it was is Elizabeth Moss. She's an excellent actress. She's done many things. Many of you probably know her from The Handmaid's Tale or Mad Men, and she's been in other movies. We talked about her a little bit in Us. Fantastic actress, and she is carrying the load here. She is front and center here. The movie hinges on her. It's on her shoulders, and she delivers. She delivers a fantastic, believable performance, both fragile and vulnerable, and tough. And it's a perfect blend. It's I dare say Ripley-esque performance. That may be hyperbolic, but I don't care because she's really great, and she deserves a lot of the credit for why this movie turned out as good as it did. It's a great film. And in terms of updating an old Universal horror movie, which by the way is an excellent movie, this is a perfect way to update a movie because it's definitely got roots in the original and in terms of some of the psychology and themes of the original, but it's basically its own story. It's a fresh take on this, a modern take on this, using modern technology, modern ideas, and modern themes as well as those original themes. So it's tackling some interesting things, like things that are a lot of get a lot of attention right now. Things like gaslighting and abuse and things like that. The Me Too movement. It really is putting a spotlight on those, not in a preachy way, but just really delving into the horror aspect of that, which I found to be absolutely fascinating and gave a nice depth to the movie. As you can see, I'm pretty effusive about the movie, and I'm not the only one. The movie was a big hit, a big hit. And that's part of why we're talking about it right now, because I'm cheating a little bit by having this movie in the shared universe subgenre, because technically it's not one yet. See, Universal, who did the original Universal Monster movies and did this movie, also tried to launch something called the Dark Universe. Back when everybody's trying to get a piece of that shared universe pie, and everybody wanted to have a shared cinematic universe, like I was talking about, Universal went all in on this and decided to take modern remakes of their Universal monsters and launch a shared universe of Universal monsters called the Dark Universe, and they promoted it this way. Their first stab was a movie called Dracula Untold, which we talked about a little bit, which was actually quite good. Didn't launch, so then they tried to recalibrate and do it again, and they started with a Tom Cruise movie called The Mummy, which was supposed to be a modern updating of The Mummy, which was probably more action than horror, to be honest with you. It did not go well. It flopped at the box office. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't think that movie's anywhere near as bad as people say it is. But I can understand why it wasn't. It's not that good either, and I can understand why it failed. And it derailed their plans for that Dark Universe. They had Dr. Jekyll in the movie. I'm spoiling it slightly, but it's not that much of a spoiler. And that was clearly setting up a Jekyll and Hyde movie to be coming up. And then they'd already announced that they were going to have The Bride of Frankenstein, and they were going to have The Invisible Man, and all these movies were going to have big budgets and big stars behind them. They were going to have Angelina Jolie and Javier Bardem and Johnny Depp, and it was going to be a big deal. They went all in, and then of course it never happened. They had the one movie, it kind of flopped, and that was it. It was done. And they kind of ran away with their tail behind their legs and never made the other movies. And I think that's the problem, is they announced it, and they went they went all big and went all in on it and announced it and everything, did the photo spread and the press release and everything, instead of just doing the movies. And I know why they do that. They do that for the investors, right? They do that for their shareholders. Their shareholders see a slate of shared universe movies for the next 10 years. Oh, I'm going to invest in Universal. I'm buying that stock. The stock goes up. Stockholders are happy. Company's happy. Everybody wins. Until those movies fail or don't even get made. And that's what happened here. Not great. Not great. It seems to me it would be more prudent to not announce these things and just do them. Just make the movies and then let people realize, oh, this is a shared universe. And then once you've got the first couple wins under your belt, then go all in. That's what Marvel did. Marvel didn't announce a shared universe with Iron Man. They hinted at it. And then by the time they were getting to Captain America and Thor, then you started to pick up on this is happening. And by that point, you had a couple of hits. Marvel had some solid footing under them, and it was successful. I don't understand why everybody's such a rush to get to the Avengers. They don't want to do the Iron Man and Captain America first. And that's what the Dark Universe failed. Or did it? Because that's why we're talking about The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man is, again, it's a modern retelling of a Universal monster movie, and it was a hit. And they have said it's not part of a larger cinematic universe. It's not a relaunching of the Dark Universe. They've come out and said that. But I don't believe them. I don't believe that this is the case. I think that because this movie was so successful, that not only they're going to work on a sequel, which has been announced, they've talked about making a sequel to it, but I think they will use it as a springboard to work in some of the other Universal monsters without announcing it, which is what they should have done to begin with. This is my hope, and this is why I'm going to go ahead and give it a spot here in the shared universe subgenre, because I hope that this is what they do, and I hope they get the same quality of people to make the other movies that they did for this one, that they're the same quality, because if so, this could be a very successful way to do this. Again, don't go all in, don't go make a big deal trumpeting this. Just in the next Invisible Man movie, have a reference to or introduce another character that's going to launch another movie, or just make another movie, make a new Dracula movie or a new Frankenstein movie or something like that, and then have like Elizabeth Moss show up in or something like that, and then let us go, oh wow, they're doing it. That's the way to do it. I'm hoping they're doing it. I'm kind of expecting them to do it, because they're not going to leave that money on the table. You know what I mean? Like, there's money to be made there, and if you do it right, it can be incredibly lucrative. And so I'm expecting them to do it. So I am kind of putting my eggs in the basket. I'm putting that movie in this subgenre, expecting that to be the case. And if it never happens, then there'll be egg in my face, and I'll have to readjust the syllabus to account for it. But until then, I'm banking on this happening. A lot of you have seen The Invisible Man, so I'd love to hear what you guys think of it in the comments below. And if you haven't seen it, by all means, check it out because it's really excellent. It's really well made and really entertaining. So you owe it to yourself to check it out. It does live up to the hype. It's as good as people say it is. So check it out if you haven't. And the last movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, it's The Conjuring. The Conjuring came out in 2013 and was wildly successful and has launched an entire universe of movies that have all been largely successful, at least commercially, if maybe not always critically. If you didn't see The Conjuring, if you're one of the few who didn't see The Conjuring, the movie follows Ed and Lorraine Warren, ghost hunters who are investigating a potential haunted house at a family, the Perron family, in the early 70s. And it's based on a true story, or at least an allegedly true story, true incidents. Ed and Lorraine Warren being actual real life people, and this being one of the cases that they work on. And I won't go into too many details of the case itself because if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to spoil it. But suffice to say, the movie was a huge hit and it really put a spotlight on real life ghost hunters. Ed and Lorraine Warren. I call them ghost hunters. That's not really what they are, but like Lorraine Warren is evidently a medium, and Ed and Lorraine would investigate different paranormal incidents and try to advise or help. And there's a lot of debate as to whether or not they are frauds or if they're real. And I don't need to get into that too much here. There are people who feel very, very strongly about this. There's a lot of videos on that. Maybe I'll even link to some of those in the description. But the the Warrens are not. They're kind of the main character of the movie, but really it follows the Perron family because they're the ones that are in the haunted house and being terrorized by what's in the house. And the Warrens kind of are the heroes that come in to save the day, but it really isn't like following them so much as it follows the family. And I think that's effective. I think that works really well. But as the movie sequeled out, it didn't follow the family. The Warrens became the focus. And that was probably the right way to go because it gave the filmmakers the ability to go and follow up on other stories, other cases that the Warrens have dealt with. Perhaps their most famous case is one that they weren't even that involved in, to be honest, which was the Amityville case, which of course has been covered quite a bit, and most notably in the Amityville Horror. But they actually did touch on that in The Conjuring 2, but they didn't spend a lot of time on that. That's probably wise because it was much as I would have enjoyed seeing a full movie about that. It's been covered before. They instead focused on some of the other cases that the Warrens have worked on. Again, ostensibly true stories. The cases are true. They actually happened. Whether or not you believe in the supernatural aspects of it, whether or not you believe in the powers of the Warrens, is up for you. But the events, on a high level, actually did happen. They are historical events, and it's actually kind of fun that in the credits they show pictures of the real people, so you can kind of compare them. That's always kind of a fun part about it. Now, what makes The Conjuring so successful has got to be attributed, at least in part, to James Wan, who we talked about a little bit ago. He's an excellent director. He directed this movie, and it's great. It's it's not a throwback film. It's not. We talked about throwback films recently, and this is not a throwback film exactly. It's a period piece, but James Wan has a style that is, especially when this came out. This was not what he was doing was not what was trendy at the time. It wasn't a lot of quick cut, quick edit, in your face visual stuff like that. It was a little bit of a mood piece, a little bit slow moving. It's got jump scares. Don't get me wrong, and they're good. But he also takes the time to develop characters and set mood and tone, long shots, things like that. Lots of use of shadow, really expertly well made. It felt like a little bit of a throwback film style because of that. He wasn't going for the short attention span editing style and everything like that so much as so many other filmmakers were doing at the time. And as a result, I think this really appealed to people, both modern fans were still really into it because they just probably hadn't seen stuff like that before. We're just appreciating it. And older fans were like, oh, feels like something that's more my speed. I enjoy this a little bit. I understand this level of filmmaking a little bit more. So it was very, very successful, and I think Juan deserves a lot of the credit for that. The performances across the board are great in there. Lily Taylor is good as the wife of the family, but Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are fantastic as the Warrens. Vera Farmiga, we've talked about her before, and I can't say enough about how great she is as an actress. She's grossly underrated, but she does get a lot of credit here. She gets a lot of eyeballs on her because, again, super popular. Not only did they make sequels to this movie, but they have franchised this movie out. So the Annabelle series came out of this. The Nun movie came out of this, and I'm pretty sure they're making a sequel to that. The La Llorona movie came out that's tied to this. There's other franchises branching out from this franchise, and they're all taking place in the same universe with characters, ancillary characters that cross over from film to film. So it single-handedly created its own shared cinematic universe without even really trying. They just saw an opportunity to make the money because it was so wildly popular, and as a result, they have made the money. You can debate the merits of the sequels and the franchise spin-offs all you want, and I won't fight you on whether or not they're diminishing returns, because none of them quite as good as the original Conjuring, to be honest with you, but they've all been financially successful. I think that what people like about these movies is they know what they're going to get. Not unlike with the Marvel movies, there's a certain level of quality that you're going to meet, and it's a basic level. It's not, high art, but you know what you're going to get. You know what you're in for when you go to one of these movies, and it's going to deliver that, and it's going to deliver it well. So if you like these kind of movies, you're going to like the next one that comes out. And if you don't like these kind of movies, you're not going to like any of them. It's not going to change your mind on it. They're gonna stick to that formula, and it works for them. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind that. I've seen most of them. I might not have seen all of them, but interestingly enough, several of the other movies in the franchise or in the spin-offs will wind up being discussed on the syllabus in various areas. In fact, I think we might have discussed one of them already. I'm not sure if that's the case, but suffice to say, they've had a big cultural impact. Their fan base for these movies is very, very strong, and I think that's fine. I think it's with good reason. I think the movies are popular for a reason. They are, again, not as good as the original, not as well made as the original. James Wan did not direct any of the other movies, I don't think, and it shows. But the stories are fine. The filmmaking is fine. It's comfort food. It gives you what you're looking for. So if you're a fan of the series, I can understand why. I'd say I'm a fan of it. A lukewarm fan. I'm not, chomping at the bit to see the next one when it comes out, but I will go see it, or I'll at least check it out on video when it comes out. Because like I said, you're going to get what you want, and what you're going to get is fairly solid. But the first one is actually extremely good. I was very effusive about it when it came out, and I feel like the franchise has kind of diluted the original a little bit. But if you sit down and watch it again, you'll be impressed. It's a well-made, well-acted, well-written horror movie. It's good. It's really, really good. And so I stand by that one. If you haven't checked out the Conjuring series, if you're just kind of like, that's a little too commercial for me or whatever, give the first one a chance. And if you don't like the first one, definitely stop there. If you like that one, you might like the other ones. It might be up your alley. If nothing else, though, the original is a solid filmmaking on its own. So at least give that one a chance if you haven't. And of course, if you have thoughts on the Conjuring franchise, if you have thoughts on Ed and Lorraine Warren, let's be nice to each other. Let's not start fights with each other or anything like that. But leave that in the comments below. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that. My opinion on Ed and Lorraine Warren is I shrug my shoulders at them. Whatever. Do I think that this stuff's real? I tend not to think it's real, but I also don't think it's like they're offensive or anything. Some people get really offended by them being charlatans or whatever. I don't have strong opinions about them, but I'd be curious to hear if you have strong opinions about them. Share in the comments below. Let us know what you guys think of the Warrens and The Conjuring. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the shared universe horror movies. But if you like these kind of movies, we've got a few extra credit for movies for you to check out. The first one we're going to talk about is Alien versus Predator. And Alien versus Predator, it came out in 2004, and it is Barely horror. It's not really horror, to be honest with you. It's really more sci-fi slash action, which those franchises are. But I'll let you in on a little secret. We're going to talk about both of those franchises in the horror movie syllabus. So if I'm folding those franchises under horror, I'm folding Alien versus Predator under horror as well, in here in the shared universe extra credit section. Uh, Extra credit because while I love both those franchises and I love both the Alien and the Predator, the movie is it's fine. I don't think it's as bad as people like to say it is. It tends to be not loved by fans of those two franchises, and again, kind of not unlike with Freddy versus Jason because of the challenges in trying to incorporate the lore from those two franchises into one movie and kind of appease everybody. It's not an easy task. It winds up being a little clunky. Another thing people had problems with the movie was that it's PG-13, which doesn't bother me that much. You can make a really great PG-13 horror movie. I've seen many of them. We've talked about many of them, so that's not an issue for me. But it's okay. It's not as bad as people say it is. It doesn't deliver quite as much as you want it to deliver. It's got some narrative issues with it. Basically, if you're not familiar with it, it's some predators coming to Earth to hunt aliens that they have this tradition of bringing some aliens to Earth and hunting them, and humans have never really known about it, but the narrative is a little bit flimsy. At the end of the day, what you're looking at, alien versus predator. That's where these two things are going to fight. So again, the narrative's flimsy, but it's fine. It's good enough. They made a sequel that was worse, not great. They really wanted to have this be its own franchise. Didn't really take off. It shouldn't take off. But to be honest, both of those franchises individually are kind of limping along too. So the whole thing is kind of just a little bit of a mess right now. But if you like Alien or you like Predator, I don't necessarily recommend Alien versus Predator, but I think you should check it out just for curiosity's sake, if nothing else. And if you have thoughts on it, of course, let us know. But it's fine. I'm fine with it. It's more noteworthy for the fact that the two franchises it's representing are iconic franchises than it is for a movie in its own right. And it's more noteworthy for failing to launch, to be honest with you, failing to be a franchise on its own. So I wanted to mention it here, but you can take it or leave it if I'm being honest. Next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Doll Man versus Demonic Toys. And this movie is probably not for everybody. It came out in 1993. It's a very low budget affair, and it combines the Doll Man movie and the Demonic Toys movies, each of which have their own kind of franchises, which are both franchises from Full Moon Features, which we've talked about a little bit before. A low budget, kind of campy studio that makes movies that are tongue in cheek, kind of silly, low budget genre movies, horror schlock, sci-fi schlock, and that's what these are. Dollman's kind of a sci-fi schlock movie. Demonic Toys, kind of a schlocky horror movie. And in this movie, the two cross over, the two meet in ways that honestly don't even make much sense. Like the movie is not good. It's not a great movie. It spends a lot of time recapping the other movies for you. So if you haven't seen the other movies, don't worry because this one will explain it to you. It doesn't really matter. The stories, pretty flimsy. You're just really there to see Doll-Man fight the demonic toys, and there's honestly not enough of it. The effects are kind of cheesy, so the movie isn't great, and it's barely a movie, man. It's like just over an hour long, and a lot of it's, like I said, recycled footage from previous movies. Why am I bringing it up here? Mostly just the notoriety of it because it was the first full moon crossover event. They have a lot of different franchises of schlocky movies, and this is the first time they crossed two of them over, and they would do it in the future with like Ginger Dead Man versus Evil Bong, for example. And so I wanted to mention this one because it's kind of got a little bit of history behind that being the first one, even though it really is clearly, it's almost more like it's a commercial for the other movies. It's really kind of just like, hey, go check out these other movies and trying to kind of get fans into the other, they're the franchise. Like if you were a Dollman fan, they're trying to get you into Demonic Toys and vice versa. Would that be successful? Probably not. This movie's not good. But if you can get into that, maybe have a few drinks or something like that, if you can get into some schlocky bad movies, you might give this one a try. But you'd have to like full moon movies. Like if you don't like those kind of movies, don't even waste your time with this. But if you like those kind of movies, you have love for things like Puppet Master or Ginger Dead Man, you might get into this. You might have some fun with it. For me, this wasn't as good as those movies, in my opinion. I felt like this one was a little subpar, even by those already reduced standards. So do with it what you will, but I wanted to bring it up because I thought it had some notoriety to it. And so there it is. Dollman versus the Demonic Toys. Do with it what you will. The last extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Sadako versus Kayoko, which is a Japanese movie that blends together the franchises of both The Ring and The Grudge. And it came out in 2016. And if you haven't seen it, and probably a lot of you haven't actually, it's really kind of more like a Ring movie where a girl gets, subject to the curse of the ring, the videotape curse, and is trying to find a way to escape its clutches. And she goes to like an expert on curses who recommends trying to subject her to the grudge curse and pit the two monsters from the two curses together against each other, so that they can kind of duke it out and as a result maybe keep the girl from being killed, basically. And so Sadako from The Ring and Kayako from The Grudge get pitted against each other. It's a great concept, even though it apparently started out as like an April Fool's joke for fans. They said that they were going to do this, and apparently it's just a joke, but people were so into the idea that they actually did do it. And it was pretty successful. People were really into it. And here's the thing. It's a fun idea. It doesn't live up to that idea, in my opinion. And the reason why is because, slight spoiler here, they don't actually fight until like the last 10 minutes of the movie. It takes a long time to get to that. It takes a long time to get to that moment where they're fighting. The movie's mostly a Ring movie with aspects of The Grudge kind of thrown into it. And here's the thing. It's not bad. I like The Ring. So having a new Ring movie was fine. I actually was into that. But it was kind of an awkward fit. It didn't really blend smoothly. It's not a bad movie. I enjoyed myself watching this movie, but I did find myself waiting for those monsters to fight, and it took a lot longer than it should have. I really wish they would have gotten to that earlier or had it interspersed throughout a little bit better. The moments were too far in between. That said, the movie's having a lot of fun with itself. The characters are kind of off the wall crazy. Like there's this one character who's he's like a monster hunter who's absolutely fantastic. He's very funny. He's doing all kinds of weird things like doing weird spells or something like that. He's a lot of fun. The movie is fun. Don't get me wrong. I feel like I'm kind of coming down on it, but it's actually quite a fun movie. It's really enjoyable. But I just wish they got to the monsters faster. If you've seen it, let me know if you agree. Do you think that they should have gone to the monsters faster? Did you like the movie? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't seen it, if you're a fan of either of those series, especially if you're a fan of The Ring, I would say, give it a chance. Check it out. It's a lot of fun. So that's going to do it for our exploration into shared universe horror movies. I have a lot of fun with these movies. I think they're ambitious. They don't always succeed, but I admire the attempt. I think it's a lot of fun to take these two different things that I love or multiple things that I love and kind of try to put them together. Even if it doesn't work out well, I appreciate it. I have a good time. I hope you have a good time with these movies too, because I think they're just meant to be fun. I don't think they're trying to take themselves too seriously ever. And so if you can have a good time with them, great. That's what they're supposed to be there for. Let me know what you guys think of shared universe horror movies. Do you want to see more of those? Do you hope that the trend dies out and stops? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So that's going to do it for now. Until next week, we'll be talking about more horror movies. I'm looking forward to hearing what you say and interacting with you in the comments below. And until next time, class dismissed.